So we're going to get started today with our annual meeting. Here's just a basic overview of the minutes, things that were in the packet, meeting packet, or the minutes from last meeting in November, the slate of officers, the budget that we're going to discuss today, as well as a staffing contract for the Conservation Foundation. So those things can all be found in the meeting packet. There we go. So I wanted to start off today with just kind of celebrating 10 years for the Lower DuPage River Watershed Coalition. Work had begun back in actually 2010, 2011 to develop a watershed plan for the Lower DuPage River watershed. And then in early 2012, it was in February, the group incorporated and started working towards implementing items in the plan and really got started with the bioassessment project for our first round in 2012. So I wanted to put together just kind of a short list of some of the accomplishments that we've had over the last 10 years. This past year, we completed our fourth round of bioassessment monitoring. We've worked with the DuPage River Salt Creek Work Group to negotiate permit conditions that have resulted in what will be about $3.3 million in river restoration projects. Also working with DRCW really on a number of items, but the IPES model I think is a big one, really kind of shifting the paradigm of how we're focusing on river restoration projects and using the bioassessment data to really help us determine what the most important stressors are in our watershed and how to work towards making those improvements and sharing that information throughout the watershed so that we can be making decisions based on our local data. Very exciting last year, culmination of really probably almost 20 years of discussion around the Hamel Woods Dam, but getting that dam removed, that fell under that $3.3 million of restoration funds, but really opening up the river to over 50 miles of open river when you look at getting up into the east and west branches of the DuPage. We've developed a fairly extensive education and outreach program, both with the sort of seasonal outreach materials, with the website, the training programs around the winter de-icing programs. So that has really, I think, set us apart as far as other watershed groups in the region. And that work, a lot of that work now partnered with the Lower Des Plaines Watershed Group as well. And then the creation of the Salt Smart Save More campaign that was kicked off back in, I believe it was 2016. And that really has grown into what is now the Salt Smart Collaborative. So kind of really taking that campaign to really a regional approach and clearinghouse of information for chloride reduction practices and outreach and education materials, and now the development of training materials. So we've accomplished quite a bit over the last 10 years, and I wanted to kind of put a shout out to those of you who've been with us for the whole ride. That would be Doug Kissel. Doug's actually been on our board, starting out as vice president and then over the last number of years as president of the board. So Doug from Plainfield, Don Kinsler from Shanahan has participated with us throughout the 10 years as representative from Shanahan. Ken Carroll representing Crest Hill. And then Eric Bajork from Romeoville. Eric's on the call with us today. And then Steve Zahner with Robinson, and SP and Don Nelson, residents who've been along with us for the ride for the last 10 years. So really want to thank all of you for your dedication over the last 10 years, as well as everybody else who has joined in, either taken the place of somebody else within their organization or joined in since our beginning in 2012. So I want to go over the meeting minutes if there are any questions on the meeting minutes from November. You can just raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have any questions. Otherwise, if I can get a raise of hands for a motion to approve the minutes as they were presented. So I got Joe Slepnick and Tim Jeskowitz. Just jot down the notes here. Put up our first poll. So you can just click your answer and submit. Okay, great. We have 12 yeses and 2 abstains, so the minutes carry. Can move on. Thank you. And moving on, I'd like to present the executive board slate for 2022. So all of our board members have agreed to continue on in their positions. So we have Doug continuing on as president, Nick at vice president, and Amy at treasurer secretary. And then Andrew Hawkins from the Forest Preserve District, Dina DeHulick from the Conservation Foundation, Randy Jessen, the Will County Stormwater Committee, and Ryan Anderson with the Village of Minoka. So if I can have everybody lower your hands, and then unless there are any questions or because any questions, if I can get a motion to accept the executive board slate for 2022. So I have Joe Slepnick and Ryan Anderson. Jot those down. Next poll.
I didn't mean to vote for myself. My hand was stuck up, but it's
Okay, I can put,
Thank you.
I got Steve Zahner on there as well, so I can add Steve's name to that. No problem. Okay. All right, so I have 12 yeses and 3 abstains, so our motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll get on to discussion around the 3-year budget. So quick couple of notes here in the beginning, and then I'm going to go through some of the individual pages of the budget. And again, if you have any questions, please just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask, raise your hand. Trying to keep track of looking at 3 different screens. So feel free to just ask questions. So 3-year budget is presented. We're going to have 2 votes. So we're going to vote to approve the dues for the next 3 years. And then we will vote to approve the budget for fiscal year 2022-23. The dues will increase approximately 3%. And that will be then held steady for this 3-year budget cycle. And we have a slight staffing increase from 37 hours to 39 hours a week. And that's split across 5 staff here at the Conservation Foundation. And that extra time really will be to oversight of the design and implementation of our second river restoration project, which we're going to talk more in detail about in a few minutes. So the general budget summary of our expenses over the next 3 years. We're carrying over about $90,000 from our previous 3-year cycle. So that's the starting balance up there, up here at the top. And then that number kind of gets whittled down over the next three years here. So that in the end, our target will be to end somewhere around 13,000. Here is the proposed dues for the next 3 years. So this is the dues for this new cycle in comparison to what the dues were in the most previous cycle. So we have a slight increase across the board, at approximately 3%. And so we, rather than multiplying dues by 3%, it was really more backed into that number based on what our financial need was. So that's why the numbers are slightly more than 3%, and everybody's a little bit different, but that's really just kind of based on size of either discharge or acres within the watershed. So, anybody has questions around that? Again, here's the administrative expenses. So this part of the budget has gotten a little bit smaller as far as line items go. Last year, we had made some changes on the TCF contract side of things, where basically our billing rate just wrapped in some of the individual items that had been included in here, particularly around like software and computer and other office expenses are just wrapped into our billing rate. And so really the only additional staff related costs in addition to salary are really specific things like mileage, which is reimbursed at the IRS rate. And then if there's any like major copying or other office supplies that are very specific to like a project or something within the group, but like normal copying and office supplies are just included in the billing rate. And then we have our audit and tax return preparation, and then our the insurance costs for director liability, fraud insurance, crime insurance. That's all wrapped in, and the number goes up a little bit next year because our crime policy is good for 3 years, and so that will be the next time that bill will come up for payment. And then software. This software is just specific. It's actually covering our Power BI, which is a very specific software for the watershed group. All the other software that's just related to kind of our normal getting the job done. So like Microsoft Office and ArcGIS and the Zoom account, things like that is all wrapped up into the billing rate. So, and then the last thing is the website management. And again, this changes a little bit year to year, and that's based on like our security certificate for the website is like, it's good for 2 years. So every other year we're paying that. And then we also are, some of those hosting and security certificates, they can be used for multiple websites. So we're able to actually split those costs with some of the other work that TCF does. So that we've been able to really bring those costs down quite a bit as compared to some previous years. So it's kind of the explanation around the administrative expenses. for monitoring. Basically getting ready for our monitoring that'll happen in 2024. It's basically, looking at kind of a general increase for the work that we have done with MBI. And then on the chemistry side, we've increased to give us a little bit more room as we're adding a couple of different parameters. This past year, we added in parameters around our expanded DO program, and that was covered through the NIP development, but going forward, those costs will be just incorporated into our bioassessment. And then we'll also be renegotiating our chemistry lab services agreement this year. So we had done an agreement I think it was 4 years ago, with Microbac industry or Microbac laboratories, and kind of set a price for 4 years in partnership with Lower Des Plaines and DRCW. So we all share that lab services agreement. We're going to be renegotiating that again for the coming years. So kind of leaving some room in there, kind of expecting some changes with that. And then I think we still have funds carried over to complete the bioassessment from this past year. And then, as we had discussed earlier in 2021, when we were doing our looking at our organizational insurance, we had an option to insure our probes, but it really didn't make a lot of sense to go through an insurance program like that, because if we had to replace it, the replacement costs were kind of not anywhere near the funds that we would need to replace the probe itself. So we're really just building in our kind of self-insurance repairs and then eventual replacement of ASOND. And then as we get into the next budget cycle, we'll probably be replacing or adding more funds in for replacement. So if we have any questions around the budget. Okay, so we're gonna, without any questions, we're gonna do this in 2 parts. So I would like to get a motion to approve the agency dues for the 2022 to 2025 3-year budget cycle. So I have Dina and I have Joe. Put up the next poll. Okay, and actually this is going to come in, there'll be 2 questions. So I'm going to amend the motion unless I have any, actually, can I get a second motion then to do the budget for 22-23? So I have Amy and Steve, and then I'm going to put up a poll for both questions. So if you can answer both questions and hit your submit. Okay, we have 13 yeses and 2 abstains. So the motion carries. Thank you very much. And then moving right along, if there's any questions around the staffing contract. So then the only things that changed in the contract from last year is just updating dates and then the budget total to reflect the total in the the budget that we just approved, $79,704. So if I can get is there any questions? Okay, and then I guess a motion to approve the staffing contract. By Joe and Doug. All right, grab that poll. Okay, we got 13 yeses and 2 abstains. So that motion carries. Thank you. All right. Oh, okay, jumped right in. Okay, so the last thing for approval, wanted to talk about where things are at with our second project. We had discussed the project at the last meeting in November. And so I think this slide is actually the same slide I used last year, or last November. So we're looking at a project will essentially fall between Route 126 and Renwick Road. As part of kind of what had been identified in the table that's in the special condition in the permits, is a site that had to be upstream of Hamel Woods. We had like a 14-mile stretch that had been identified. Part of the kind of background for choosing a location was really having access to public lands. That just gives us it makes things a whole lot easier, gives us a good partner to do construction with, and definitely gives us more room to work. So this was actually the largest stretch of publicly owned land. We have public ownership pretty much entirely on the west side of the river, and then we have public ownership in a fair chunk of it on the east side of the river, with both park. So on the west side, it's the Village of Plainfield. On the east side, a combination of Village of Plainfield and the Park District, Plainfield Park District. And then we'll also be reaching out to some of the private landowners along at least a portion of that stretch on the east side. There we go. So project objectives is really to improve the aquatic life scores within this section of the stream. So looking at fish and bug scores, improve habitat function. Really, we have a very wide, flat, uniform channel. So we're really looking for ways to incorporate kind of more habitat, diversifying flow through there. Really looking at what the potential would be for potentially putting in some riffles, really just increasing habitat in a number of different aspects, looking at substrate. So really trying to reduce the uniformity through this whole section, looking at stream bank stabilization, as well as connecting floodplain and riparian habitat back to the stream. So we put out a statement of interest last October. So it would have been late October, early November. We received 6 statements of interest. We worked through the review committee to shortlist 3 firms out of the 6 to request them to prepare a full proposal. So we had proposals and then separately cost proposal to go with that. We held interviews on January 10th with the review committee, and the review committee has made a recommendation to the board. And we made a review, I'm sorry. We recommended the winning firm to the board. And the board this morning at our board meeting has accepted that recommendation. So what we're looking for today is to authorize staff and board to negotiate, execute a contract. The tasks within that contract will be to, to do design, engineering. So through that design process, working with the committee to look at different design alternatives. We'll narrow in on the alternatives, do the engineering, permitting, and then the development of construction and bid documents kind of will all be part of this phase of the contract or phase of the project. So do we have any questions about sort of the next steps for the project? Okay. So again, basically the staff are looking to get authorization to negotiate and execute a contract not to exceed $250,000 with the winning firm for design, engineering, permitting, construction bids. Check out the chat question. It's a question of who is it. So the three firms that we interviewed was Engineering Resource Associates, WBK, and Hay and Associates. As soon as we get through the negotiation process, we will put out as to which of those firms it was that we won, but we want to get through, make sure that we can negotiate a contract with the winning consultant, but then still have the ability to move on to the second one if necessary. So we will make an announcement as soon as negotiations are done. Okay. So if there are no other questions, if I can get a motion for authorization. I have Steve and I have Dina. All right, last poll for today. Okay, I have 11 yeses and 2 abstains, 3 abstains. So our motion carries. Thank you very much. So again, that was the last poll for today. And now we're going to move into review, and then I'll be able to hand this off and have some other folks share some of what's going on for the next year. So just kind of a quick couple of slides here. We're going to talk about some of these things in a little bit more detail, but wanted to kind of summarize everything on a couple of slides of things we've worked on over the last year. So we have successfully completed the removal of the Hammerwood stand. Very exciting this past fall. And then we also found out late in December that Will County Forest Preserve District is going to recognize the coalition in February with an Appreciation of Partners Award. So that'll happen at one of the Will County board meetings. So that's very nice to be recognized for that project. We just talked about the second river restoration site. So we had completed our SOI and RFP process. We'll be moving on to the next stages for that here in 2022. We completed our 4th round of bioassessment. New this year was adding the expanded DO and chlorophyll A sampling. As Dina's going to go through a lot more detail on NARP, I should have put NIP. I'm sorry, I've been trying to change that all back to NIP, the nutrient implementation plan, because that's specifically what is in our permits. But we through DRSCW, completed the Nonpoint source study characterizing phosphorus components and impacts on leaf collection and street sweeping practices. We discussed IPES model thresholds to help guide NIP development. So we had a meeting last year with the dischargers, looking at what that threshold looks like and how that may work into a limit for phosphorus in the future. And then we started the work on the QC2K model for the lower DuPage. As mentioned before, partnering with other watershed groups in Lake County to host our workshops, winter workshops with over 930 participants. And we held 3 winter technical brief webinars this year. Organizationally, kept up with, got our financial audits done, and we put director and officer insurance in place earlier in 2021. Completed our MS4 reports for all of our outreach activities. So those are available on the website. We'll be updating that, and I'm providing that in early March for 2021. In the outreach side of things, we created our new joint website with the Lower Des Plaines. It makes our outreach material a whole lot easier to find. There's a lot more information for residents, and then a lot more information about the specifics of what the coalition does, and then continue to expand our outreach topics and formats. Yeah, I just wanted to include a few pictures. So that was our sort of before pictures for the dam and our free flowing pictures of the dams. That. The dam had been right up in here. This is the new canoe launch that the Forest Preserve put in as part of the project. You know, we had showed the video at the last meeting. So, you know, people, I've been very excited about this project. It's been something that has been part of my discussions and work for literally over 20 years. So very exciting to see this project actually get completed. And then again, just summarizing our bioassessment and the work that was done with that. And now I'm going to just hand things over to Dina to kind of give everybody, get everybody up to speed with where things are at with the NIP, especially as our December 2023 date is coming up quickly. So Dina, it's all you.
Okay, thank you. If anyone has any questions, you can, like, as we're going, you can raise your hand, or we can just wait to the end, however you want to do it. So here's our NIP permit language. I put this up every year. I guess it's just always a good reminder to see it, you know, that we're working on this nutrient implementation plan, which shows up in other watershed groups as either the Fox River implementation plan for our friends over in the Fox, or the nutrient assessment and reduction plan for pretty much everybody else in the state. It's sort of been evolving over time, but this is the language that we have, that we're supposed to be looking at phosphorus input reductions from point sources, non-point sources, and other measures, and finding other measures to remove our dissolved oxygen and our offensive condition impairments. And so our obviously dissolved oxygen is, you know, a TMDL parameter, and then offensive conditions refers to the narrative standard, which is excessive algae or excessive plants growth in the river. There are also offensive conditions for things like oil and grease, but obviously that's not a nutrient. So we're really focusing on the areas that we have these algae blooms, as well as those excessive plants like we see down through the lower DuPage. It also gives the lower DuPage permission to work with its neighbors up in the DRSCW. So that's how we're addressing it. So everything I talk about today, all the projects that we're working on cover both watersheds. And this plan is due to the agency, the IEPA, by December 31st, 2023, as Jennifer said. Next slide. So we've got a little bit of guidance, but not much. One of the things the IEPA has been very clear on is they're not going to give us a specific checklist on what needs to be in these documents, because each watershed is unique, each watershed stakeholder is unique, and they're kind of empowering us to take this, take what we to take and develop the NARP to get what we want out of it for how we see our plans with our plants moving forward. But they have, like I said, they've given us like a little bit of guidance, and I've kind of broken it up into two things. So what they're looking for in sort of the watershed information and existing data section is sort of who's working on the NARP, where are the impairments or the risk or eutrophication factors identified? So where are we seeing this nuisance algae or plants, or where do we have DO impairments? Or in some cases, do we have any areas where actually total phosphorus is listed as an impairment, on the 303B list? We have to look at why we are focused mainly on our wastewater plants. We do have in our MS4 communities, we do have to consider everybody, even though they may or may not be at the table. So we will be looking at sort of our industrial stormwater permittees as well as some non-point sources. And they want us to summarize our existing data from you guys at the plants as well as with the stream monitoring data. I know that you guys, as a wastewater plants, provide data to Jennifer and MBI as part of the bioassessment, looking at your DMR data for the last 3 years and things like that. But you'll likely see a second call coming out from me in the next couple months. That'll be a little bit more specific, looking at certain parameters and asking you to maybe even a longer time frame than the last 3 months to pull some of that data together. So sort of a heads up that you'll see likely an email coming from me. And then obviously some summaries of our stream monitoring data that we're doing through our bioassessments. Next, so this is what I consider the easy stuff, and then this is sort of the harder stuff. This is like sort of the data analysis and findings. So one of the things that they're looking for out of these NIP/NARPs is a target level for total phosphorus. So as you guys know, we don't have a water quality standard for total phosphorus in our streams. We have some effluent limits, such as the 1 milligram per liter that several of you guys have, but that's not directly correlated to a water quality standard like we see with other parameters. So what they're sort of asking us to do is to develop our own target. They're calling it a target level. So it's not a water quality standard, but they're asking us in a way to sort of develop a target level for total phosphorus, which could then be transformed into an effluent limit. So they have given us 2 ways, through the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy process and the Nutrient Science Advisory Committee. They did a lot of studies and they came up with a recommendation in December of 2018 of a recommended limit of approximately 0.1 milligrams per liter of total phosphorus. Or we can develop our own. And we've sort of taken that second option because 0.1 milligram per liters of TP is very low, very expensive. And we wanted to actually, look at our existing stream data and see what we had. So we're working on that, developing our own water specific target level, which we'll talk about more. And then from that, we have to identify where we can get input reduction, phosphorus reduction. So what would be a recommended effluent limit from our point sources, and what kind of projects or what should we look for to help control some of the non-point source pollution that's coming in. Have a schedule, and then that schedule will go into our NPDES permits. So whatever we decide through this process that we want to do, it will go into our permits, just like our existing special condition projects, and we'll work over a period of time implementing them. And it allows us to look at water quality trading. Next slide. So this is sort of what we've been taking as our, overview. And I have a error on that slide on the title, but that's fine. It should be DRCW/Lower DuPage. We want to make sure that we're looking at data driven. We want to make sure that all of our decisions are backed up by data. They have used really good, scientific method to get to them. And some of them are even going to be peer reviewed by other folks besides for the DRCW staff or our consultants that are working on. We're hiring outside third-party consultants to do some review on some of these approaches. We want to stay with our biodiversity approach. That the DRCW and the Lower DuPage River Watershed Coalition has really been focused on improving the macroinvertebrate and fish scores in this. We don't really, we do take into account some of the individual pollutants, but have always not looking to hit just certain targets for DO and certain targets for phosphorus. Our goal is to make all of those targets for those individual parameters that sort of show up in your effluent permit as the goal of increasing that aquatic life scores and getting our biological integrity built back into our streams. And we've sort of set that approach out through the way that we're implementing our existing TMDLs, both up here in the East Branch in Salt Creek and on section GB16, which is the section that Naperville, Bolingbrook, and Plainfield discharge. We have, this adaptive management approach that we've been looking at implementing this process. And I don't think we're just going to focus on nutrients. If other things come up, we know that we have a lot of physical impairments with the stream bank erosion and things like that. We want to make sure that we're encompassing like our whole approach and not really just focusing solely on phosphorus, because while we do realize that phosphorus needs to be targeted, there's other things that also need to be targeted in these watersheds, and we don't want them to get lost in all the focus just to focus on phosphorus alone. Next slide. So these are the things that how we see our NIP is not just a study. It is not just a single one page, we're not putting all our eggs in one basket. We have multiple different things going on. And then they all do work together, but they are kind of single efforts. And I'm going to go through each of these and what we've been working on and where we are going with each of these programs in the next couple of slides. You can see some of our examples of excessive algae growth and macrovertebrate growth on some of those pictures that I put on that slide. Next slide. So we have the IPES model, and we've had several presentations on this, and the update to the IPES model was a special condition permit obligation that we met in 2018. So quite a long time ago. We've been working on different facets of it. But the IPES really does serve, I consider this sort of like the backbone of our NIP. This is the study that we've put a lot of our resources into, a lot of our attention, and a lot of our data, and worked with some really great folks to develop this model that we've been using. And it provides kind of three functions in our NIP. We talked a little bit earlier about that. They asked us to help us develop a watershed specific target level for total phosphorus. There are many ways to do that. But the way that the IPES looks at each of the individual stressors or pollutants, however you want to think of them, it is focused on where those levels fall in accordance with our aquatic life goal. They work together. So the way that the IPES model has developed has been, what do we need to do to improve the macroinvertebrate and fish scores in those streams? And then has set these benchmarks, thresholds, target levels, there's a bunch of different words for various pollutants. And one of them is phosphorus. And it comes up with looking at an in-stream concentration of 0.28 milligrams per liter of total phosphorus. So we have this really good backbone of what our watershed specific target level for phosphorus would be, knowing that we need a concentration in the streams of around 0.28 milligrams per liter in order to help improve those aquatic life populations. It also helps us not only look at the phosphorus in itself, but other priority stressors. And we can do that in many ways for the entire watershed, by stream reach, by sites. You've seen some of this data when we start getting into development of that project down at the stream restoration project down there in Plainfield. We'll be looking at some site-specific data, some stream reach-specific data, but it looks at all this data and helps us identify what those priority stressors are, on this micro level as well as these macro levels. And they can be everything from our effluent limit, our water quality standard base, or water quality standard parameters such as dissolved oxygen, chlorides, phosphorus, the nitrogen speciations, to other things such as impervious surface and land use based stressors, as well as habitat stressors, and breaking that habitat down, not just from one score with the overall QHI, but looking at those individual components. Is this stream lacking bed substrate? Is it lacking stream bank stabilization? What about its buffer conditions? And helps us find out those priority stressors. And then from that, it's going to help us develop a list of priority stream projects. We know as our philosophy and where we've come from is that we don't just want to focus on effluent limits as a work group. We want to still continue this goal of improving our priority stressors, which, in our watersheds, which tend to be a lot of habitat based. So the year of 2021-22 did not have a lot of work on our IPES model because we finished it in 2018. So we're sort of piecing things out, but we do have a lot of work planned for upcoming up. We are going to finalize the final report as well as the user manual. There's some health issues over at MBI, so we're waiting for them to get resolved so that we can, go full force into these things. We're going to do some Power BI training for staff. Jennifer mentioned that, one of the things that the IPES update has given us is this really great database in a really usable format that we can get data out to folks. It can be applicable on the web. But in order for us to do that, we need to be trained in the backbone of it. And so that's one of the things we have scheduled. We were planning on doing it last week, but like I said, some health issues came up with the staff over at MBI. And so we're hoping to get it on the calendar here in the next, in the remaining part of quarter one, or if not quarter two of this year. We also need to take that 0.28 number. Like I said, it's an in-stream number. We want to look at sort of the viability of what that actually means for an effluent coming out of our wastewater plant. So we're going to be doing some work through some of our other studies, as well as through discussions, trying to narrow down that number, what that would look like as an effluent limit. We selecting projects, and then we're going to be having a separate contract with MBI to really piece out and develop the text that will help us in our NIP to back up and support that 0.28 milligram per liter effluent limit of phosphorus. You know, Stephen and I and Jennifer could write some of that text, but really we need some input and some, you know-how from the staff at MBI that did all that work on that development of that limit to really be able to explain to the IEPA where our number came from and why it is scientifically defendable in a way for us to keep working forward. Next slide. This is a new project that we're going to start doing. One of the things that the IPES model does not really do very well is give us an idea for dissolved oxygen. And the reason why that is that you need a large bank of data for that. And so the dissolved oxygen data that's picked up as part of the bioassessment is a grab sample. They use a meter when they're out there collecting the 2 to 12 water quality samples that they're out there, and they drop it in, they take an instantaneous reading, and we have a number. But that number, as we guys know from dissolved oxygen, I tried to find a really good graph of how the oxygen cycle works in streams, and I couldn't do it. So we have a blank slide, but we know that it's a very dynamic parameter that we need more of that continuous data. We do have some continuous data, obviously, from the SONs that, Plainfield and Naperville and the work and the coalition have been putting in the streams, and, the RSCW also has a network, but they're very discrete locations. It doesn't cover the whole stream. Through the expanded DO program, we have pulled in quite a bit more of dissolved oxygen data. It's not long-term, it's 1 to 2 week deployments, but at a couple more sites in critical locations, such as downstream of wastewater treatment plants in the headwaters area. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with MBI to help us really piece out and kind of get a better understanding of how dissolved oxygen criteria functions in the stream, and possibly work at developing either a method on how to get to, or if we have enough data, developing sort of that target level for DO. The standard is very clear. We have to be, it's like a 5 milligram per liter over a certain many days, things like that. But we know that it's so dynamic. Is there some way we can develop like a time limited, dissolved oxygen sort of study that we can start working through and pulling all this information together? So Stephen's been working with MBI and Chris Yoder at MBI on developing this scope. But this is something that we're going to be working a lot on, in this coming year to see what we can do. We also know that the 0.28 milligram per liter is likely not going to solve all the dissolved oxygen issues that we're seeing in our streams, especially within the segments that are listed impaired and have the TMDLs. But maybe the standard is not the best way to be interpreting the data. We should be looking at it in different ways to see if we're tracking those improvements. And that's what this study is going to be looking at. Next slide. Kind of building on that, we have our QC2K modeling going on. We talked about that at the last meeting, and the last joint projects committee meeting we had. And these are actually water quality computer simulation models that are focused on dissolved oxygen, as well as some nutrients and algae and CBOD. And so we've been working on this project, for you guys really this year, because we used a lot of the 2018 data that was collected as part of your last bioassessment. So we were sort of waiting to all that get. Plus we had to wait for the West Branch and East Branch models to be developed, since they're the ones that feed in and inform the headwater conditions to your models. So within the 2020 the last fiscal year, we have completed and calibrated all 4 models. So we have separate models for the East Branch, the West Branch, Salt Creek, and the Lower DuPage. We've done our sensitivity analysis. We have draft model reports for all 4 watersheds. I hope to get those out to you guys by the end of the month for review, if you want to kind of dive in. And that will walk us through the model setup and the model calibrations. And we've also started looking at preliminary scenario results. Because we used that 2018 data, we had to redo a scenario on the Lower DuPage for the Hamel Woods. And then we're pre-planning with removal of foliage report at Salt Creek. And then we've taken that effluent limit that that water quality target level that the IPES model developed, and sort of playing with that number to see what that looks like. Looking at a effluent limit of that 0.28, as well as a slightly lower limit of 0.22 milligrams per liter of TP. So we've run these preliminary scenarios, we've gotten some data, and now we're sort of tweaking that data to see where we're going to move next. Next slide. So that kind of takes us into where we're going. So we're going to look at some additional scenario results. You can see there's some scenario results graphs there showing you kind of looking at the outputs that we're getting from these models. And we'll go through, probably have another presentation to you guys with Tetra Tech coming up in the next couple months with these final results. But we also want to look at some additional scenarios, such as like what happens if there is no POTW? Could we kind of look at like if we had no POTW inflow, no flow and or any sort of perimeters coming in, kind of could that sort of be used as a background to see, you know, what it looks like then compared to what it looks like as we implement measures. We also were going to look at POTW inflows of zero nutrients, both the phosphorus, the species, and the CBOD, as sort of another way to sort of set background conditions to see what improvements we are making and where we are going. We've talked about running the POTD effluent limit of that has come out of the third-party agreement of 0.5 milligrams per liter. And then one of the other things we also want to look at is sort of the seasonally specific. Could we sort of maybe have a higher limit during the winter months when it's not as critical to algae growth as well as to the aquatic life, and then lower that limit during the growing season, you know, from that March to August, you know, March to October type area. So we're going to be playing with some of those in the next couple months. We also want to take some of the scenario graphs that we've already created and everything new and sort of look at them a little bit differently. You can see that we've been sort of looking at like DO, like average DO concentration, and that might not be what we want to be really looking at. We want to be looking at maybe what percentage of time it is below the DO standard to give us a better picture of what's going on, as well as some more outputs on the chlorophyll A and other parameters that the graphs contain. And then we'll have a draft scenario report that'll come out, you know, likely probably mid this year. The contract with Tetra Tech has been extended to run through July, so we'll hopefully have like a draft final report sometime this summer. Next slide. So changing basis from effluent limits and POTWs, one of the special condition requirements that we have in our permits was the completion of a non-point source feasibility analysis. It was very general, and it was due to the IEPA by December 31st of 2021. We were like a whole week early. It was very impressive on our end. We got it in before Christmas. The website is up there for where it's located on your website if you want to go look at it. And what this work did is this report focused on some critical practices to reducing phosphorus in urban watersheds. We know from a lot of studies that the DRCW has helped fund with the USGS in Wisconsin, that a major source of dissolved phosphorus, which is really critical to that algae and that plant growth in urban areas, comes from what is coming off our streets, whether that be the leaf litter or the debris coming off those streets. So we wanted to focus on our street sweeping and then our leaf litter practices to identify what is going on out there and are there any improvements that could be made. So the next slide, which we'll go to in a second, kind of summarizes that report because you guys we haven't had a formal presentation on that, and it might be something we want to do in the future to sort of really get into the nitty gritty of what that report had. But we used a questionnaire, obviously, to obtain all this data. There were several big landowners in the area that didn't submit that data that we do want to try to track those down, as well as some of the littler ones. Cook County, where we have a lot of the MS4 communities that don't have wastewater treatment plants because they're MWRD land, didn't respond. We're going to spend a little bit of time trying to see if we can get a couple more, and especially from those larger communities. And then once we get that data, we want to rerun some of the numbers. And then the key thing that we'll want to do this year is start considering as we're going through, you know, what those, as part of the NIP process is, which recommendations from this report do we want to put into our NIP to sort of carry on and start moving forward with. So the next slide. So just really quickly, so we used a questionnaire, and the questionnaire went to all of our agencies, and we used our contacts as well as tried to track down actual public work contacts via websites from all of our municipalities, townships, and agencies. And we received quite a bit. We got 48 communities, 6 townships, and 1 agency. That agency is IDOT, just so So you guys kind of know. So IDOT, the agencies would be somebody like the Tollway or IDOT, things like that. So it was IDOT that responded. And we had, which covers about 77% of our total watershed area. So that's pretty good. I mean, we got a pretty good amount, but we'd like to sort of see if we can shore up a little bit more. And from that is almost all of the community, well, all of the communities, and but only about half the townships collect leaf litter. So, you know, that's something that we want to maybe consider and look at more. And obviously IDOT doesn't do that because they rely on you guys as municipal members to pick up the leaf litter likely around the roads. And then 47 of those communities and 3 of those townships and IDOT obviously have street sweeping programs. And so we sort of have the first part of the report focuses on the questionnaire and summarizes all that data in many different ways, has tables, has charts, things like that. So you can sort of kind of see who's doing what and what's going on out there. And then we took the street sweeping data and we entered it into a model that was created by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency that actually helps calculate how much phosphorus is being removed by the street sweeping. And so we did that, and you can see on that table that kind of shows our results. So from those, that 70% of the watershed, you know, whether we're looking at the 25th percentile, the 50%, you know, we're collecting somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 pounds of phosphorus per year. Now, when you compare that, so I ran a really quick dirty number on the amount of phosphorus that's coming out of the wastewater treatment plants per year, and it's about 1.2 million pounds. So it's, yeah, obviously we're looking at a huge scale of differences, but this leaf litter and this street sweeping is the largest source from our non-point sources. So it is important, you know, if we want to look at any sort of non-point source control, you know, it's a good thing to focus on, but it's just saying that non-point source control of phosphorus is not going to save all streams. We do need to get, you know, the POTWs involved on that. And then the final section of the report looks at some street sweeping recommendations on how we could improve this, as well as some additional further studies or analysis that we might want to do at some point if we think it's worthwhile. There's one section of the report that I didn't message here that we talked a little bit about last time, was the effective canopy cover, where we have really great information for you guys to see where your areas and what land uses within your municipalities have the heaviest amount of trees. So it might help you guys with staging of where you do sweep or where you might want to sweep more. For this, tell you what percentage of the road is actually covered with trees. It's super complicated and I kind of skipped it over on here, but that information is sort of in the middle of that report. But the final report is available for you guys to look at and review on your website. The nutrient trading program, you know, looks at both sides. We were looking at trading among our POTWs, as well as trying to develop a stream restoration crediting approach. The POTW basis used your feasibility analysis, and that was completed in 2018 and 2019. And since then, we've really been focused on the stream crediting side of things. And as we worked through it, we had an additional scope of work that came through that we needed to make some changes to our contract that would have added significant costs, somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 to the work in order to get to the end product. And as we talked through it, and with our POTW members, as well as with the projects committee, we really didn't want to focus sort of on a formal trading program until we have a TPF limit. We know when that's going to go online. So if we do have something like a 0.28 limit, you know, and it's going to go online in 2040 or, you know, 2038, that kind of thing. And then we have to kind of wait for our plants to catch up and tell us whether or not they're going to be able to meet that limit. Will they be a buyer? Could they be a seller? So it wasn't worth it at this point to really put a lot more money into this effort, especially since the NIP process itself is allowing us to sort of do some of that trading without being confined to the formal trading process that the regulatory agencies have set up. So it's on hold. We did not go forward with that scope adjustment. We've closed out that contract with Tetra Tech, and we're just sort of in a holding pattern. We're keeping our minds open that we may go back to it one day, but at the moment, it just doesn't seem like a priority project for us. Next slide. Jennifer talked a little bit about this in her presentation, the expanded DO and chlorophyll A monitoring. One of the things that our bio segment had been lacking for a while is we did not have a lot of this chlorophyll A data, whether that be stastonic, so the in-stream chlorophyll, or the benthic, the algae growing on the bottom of the stream. So we sort of developed a program for that. With the chlorophyll A, the sestonic part of that chlorophyll A monitoring, we've added chlorophyll A sampling as a nutrient demand product to our bioassessments. So it is now just going to be roped into that. It is, we're going to start building that database, and that'll be real helpful for in the future when we do, if we do have the opportunity or we do decide to update the IPS yet again, it'll give us another way of, give us some really good data to start getting sort of that threshold mark for that sestonic chlorophyll A. The expanded DO monitoring program has also been implemented in all of our watersheds at this point. This is a project where we're putting out sondes at the headwaters and then below each of our wastewater treatment plants for about 1 to 2 weeks, depending on weather and things like that. So there's short-term deployments of sondes that are collecting a lot more frequent data than our continuous network. They're looking at every 15 minutes versus every hour. And during that time, we go out and we also collect a bunch of additional parameters, our normal nutrient demand parameters, but also some of our speciations, orthophosphorus, dissolved phosphorus, as well as collection of a benthic algae sample. And if you remember that one of the goals of the NIP/NARP that the IPA has done has not only been impairments, but identifying where we have risk of eutrophication. And the data we collected is going to be specifically used to analyze where we do have a risk of eutrophication or possibly already eutrophication through a method that's known as SNAP, or the Stream Nutrient Assessment Procedure. And this program, this analysis will kind of give us some criteria that we can delve in and sort of kind of get a gradient of where each of our watersheds sit. And this program was developed out of Ohio, and it's been it's a really good tool to sort of kind of get a snapshot, and also, you know, use some, instead of just using grab samples, but this continuous network, this continuous sonde data to help make some of those evaluations. So we have all 4 watersheds collected. So this year I'm going to spend a lot of time going in and working with some staff at MBI with Vicky to really implement the SNAP and kind of get some of those gradients and sort of tease out some of that information. Next slide. I think that's all I have. Oh, sort of an overall schedule to kind of give you guys a heads up. One of the things we want to do in Q1 and Q2 is really hash out what that watershed specific target level is going to be, and turning that into an effluent limit. We want to start some preliminary discussions with the IEPA this year, hopefully, you know, in summer, early, I guess that's early fall, and kind of present them their idea so we can kind of get some initial reactions. We don't just want to wait till December, you know, 31st, 2023 and send them something and then believe that, you know, we're completely off base. We want to make sure that we have some buy-in, or as much buy-in as that we can get from our regulatory agencies, you know, as we go. One of the things that I want to have done by the end of this year is that watershed information in existing data section, sort of the background, the who, the how, the what, the whys, is all something that we can get done early and not be writing up against a deadline. So I have a end deadline here of December 31st, 2022. I actually would like to probably try to even get this done by the end of the summer. And then we'll be able to get that out to you guys to review. It's something that we're actually going to be meeting on in the next couple of weeks with staff to get Alex Handel. We're really working on that section for us. It'll be really great for him to learn a little bit more about the watersheds and the data that's available and get some writing experience. And then for this, the draft NIP, like Jennifer said, it's due in December, but there's a lot of review that needs to go in by all you guys, our project committee and everybody else. And so my goal is to have some sort of draft by that July. So we have 6 months that's really just spent on reviews and that fine tweaking. So in order to make that deadline, the next 18 months are probably going to be full of lots of decision making by the projects committee and other folks in the negotiations team on some of these issues and making some decisions and kind of pulling this all together. So if you are interested in tracking this, I really recommend you join the projects committee. If you're not, if you haven't joined already, we'd welcome you. And I guess stay tuned. We're getting ready to go on a wild ride here, I think.
Great. Thank you, Dina. It's a lot of great information. Keep everybody up to speed on where this is going, as this is a really important component and requirement for many of our members. All right, I'm going to touch on our winter chloride stuff, since chloride is, another big component of some of the implementation work that we're doing. So like I mentioned before, we held our normal workshops this past fall. We expanded to hold 3 public roads and 2 parking lots and sidewalks. Again, kind of sharing coordination and expenses with, as we normally do with Lower Des Plaines, but also DRCW, the Conservation Foundation, and Lake County, and partnering with other watershed groups up there, and getting support from some of our other local counties to put these workshops on since they were held virtually. We had over 930 participants that we were able to track for the workshops from across the region. So I think a very successful set of workshops. We got some good feedback, and we're going to be setting up dates for next year. We'll get those up on the website. So all registration went through SaltSmart this year, which really kind of made some of the coordination a little bit easier. We were all able to advertise kind of jointly on this. So I think really a good use of time across the different groups here that were involved. So again, we should have some dates coming up fairly soon, again with Fortin Consulting for next fall. We also held 3 winter de-icing technical briefs. So these are short webinars that we held on Tuesday mornings. So kind of hitting on much more specific topics. Put it out to all those who had participated in the workshops, as well as all of our membership across Lower DuPage, Lower Des Plaines, DRCW. And so we hit on 3 specific topics. We had Denver Preston from K-Tech, really kind of talking about some of the different blends and benefits of using blended materials. Glenn Beck from Henderson really went through kind of liquids program and how to kind of get started with liquids, had a lot of great information on that. And then I did an overview of all the various kind of communications and materials that we have for communicating with your residents. So these are all available both through SaltSmart website, as well as on our Will County Watersheds YouTube page. And I am going to hand things over to Leah to talk about our education and outreach, kind of covering all the things that we worked on in 2021, and then kind of going forward for things that are coming up for this spring.
Okay, hi everyone. So a big thing we did this year, as Jennifer mentioned, was we completely redesigned our website. So it's combined now with the Lower Des Plaines Watershed group. If you need to find any organizational information, you can click on these like light blue buttons that's, at the top, Lower DuPage, or in the center of our homepage. And there you can find so the reports that Dina mentioned, or our meetings and minutes information, things like that. A big part of the redesign was to focus on making our website more friendly for the general public. So you can see here's like a little collage of some features. We have a whole blog section where we made our outreach blogs live on our website, so you can link directly there. In the upper right corner, we have certain parts of the website dedicated to the general public about watershed health, what we're monitoring in our waterways, and things that they can do at home to have a better impact on the watershed. We also asked some of you for pictures of what our waterways look like where you are, and so we're featuring some of those, which look really great. And if I'm seeing some from Shanahan and Shorewood, so if anyone else wants to send those, you can, and we can put them on the website to feature you. And then our outreach materials are housed there. You can see on the right, it's kind of like now it's a menu of our outreach materials. So if you're looking for something specifically on pet waste or native plants, it's really easy to find those. And you can get there through ldpwatersheds.org/outreach, or if you scroll to the bottom of any page, the link is in our footer. And so then a review of kind of what we did this year for outreach. In the spring, we talked about native plants. We know that they're functional for stormwater, that they integrate and filter stormwater, but then how can we get them to look good too, so more people want to integrate that into their landscaping. And we also talked about rain gardens, the benefit of those, and also focused a little bit on ecology this year. And in the spring, we talked about how freshwater mussels are an indicator species for water quality and that they improve the health of the river as well. And throughout last year, we had this project called Garden Refresh, which was about designing a native plant garden from start to finish, because that can be pretty overwhelming for people who are new to native plants or new to landscaping. So we had a few webinars, blog posts, social media posts and graphics about that, about how to choose the right native plants for your space, how to design it to make it look good. And then some of the more technical parts are there about preparing garden beds, planting and maintaining them. And we talked about that through the whole year, and we'll continue to do that this year too as the garden grows in more. In the summer, we focused around responsibility, about being responsible for our watershed in a few ways through recreation. We made this River Responsible poster and graphics with tips, for example, about that whatever you bring in on the river with you on a boat needs to come back out, things like that. So, and then another part of being responsible as a pet owner is picking up after your pet every time and everywhere. And it's been really great to see the signs that we created go out throughout the watershed. And so if you'd like signs or pet waste bag dispensers and extra bags, we have those available, so reach out to me or Jennifer. And then in the fall, we talk about leaf litter, and we focused this year about the different paths of where leaves can go. So if we don't manage leaves, the nutrients in them end up into our waterways through storm drains. If we manage them at home, the nutrients can go back into our lawn and gardens, or we can send them off through a community pickup program where we'll go to a composting facility or maybe to local farmland. And we did a feature video on how the unbagged leaves in Naperville, a lot of them end up at the Conservation Foundation's headquarters and put on the organic vegetable beds there. And then just recently, we did our winter outreach materials. So it's still winter for a few months. So I encourage you to look at those and use them. In the winter, we always talk about salt smart and chlorides. This year, we had some fun posters, comic strip about the topics of before you grab the salt, how can we remove as much snow and ice as possible? And then also trying to shift the conversation from putting as much salt out as possible and covering sidewalks and parking lots with salts to doing more efficient practices like anti-icing when they make sense. And we also are basically trying to attack chlorides from every angle. So one way to do that is to put a face on our plow drivers and let people know that our plow drivers are working really hard to clear the roads for us. And so we've kind of done this meet your plow driver profile. We sent out a form where your snowplow operators can answer a few questions. And so we had Shanahan participate in that. And so there's a few examples there. And we are still making these. So if you fill out that form, you've lost the link, let me know and I can send that out to you. And then we'll make these graphics that you can share with your community. Okay, so that was the overview of last year. We're already on to the new year and preparing for spring. So our topic areas this spring are more like natural lawn care. So we want residents and public places to use less fertilizer and herbicides and integrate more native plants into the landscape. So the blog we have this season kind of eases people into that topic. Then we also, with stormwater, talk about household hazardous waste and how they should never be dumped down drains in the home or in storm drains. So we talked about proper paint disposal and also vehicle fluid leaks, and that it's important to fix any leaks as soon as possible, and then also dispose of those fluids in the proper way. And we always make graphics to go along with those, so you can post that on Facebook and a link to one of our blogs. It's a great way to use it. And then next we have kind of the culmination of the native, the garden refresh native plant garden project I was talking about. We have these beautiful garden designs for shade and sun gardens. And so we hope that it will inspire someone to do some of this at home. They can take this plan, replicate it at home, or maybe if they have a shady garden, they can look at this plant list and pick a few from there. And then in that blue box, we kind of highlight the stormwater connection with native plants. And then just past materials in the spring, we have a lot on rain barrels, rain gardens, native plants, and other stormwater issues. So check those out too. And you can follow us on Facebook, where we show examples of how we use some of these resources. And then also our YouTube channel, if you're looking for the recordings of the meetings, our winter technical briefs Jennifer just talked about. And then when we do outreach videos, like where did the leaves go and how to calibrate a walk behind spreader, you can find those there as well. I think that's it. Just want to reiterate that I'm here to help you with the education and outreach requirements for your MS4 permit. So if you have any other ideas that would be helpful for your community, any other needs, or if you wanted to customize a material with your logo or a different kind of message, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to help.
Thank you, Leah. Yeah, Leah and I would be definitely happy to even come and meet, with you or other staff, your communications folks, so we can really kind of go through and what information we have available and how it might be used, and again, how it could be customized. The topics this year, one of the things that we had looked at was the new MS4 permit was out for review later last year. And so kind of looking through the topic, because there were a few specific topics that are listed in the MS4 permit as far as outreach programs go that we did not have covered yet. And so that's why we kind of hit on the household hazardous waste, the paint disposal, the auto fluids, to help try to round out and fill in gaps of topics that we did not yet have covered as related to the MS4 permit. So again, if you have other ideas or specific topics, please reach out to us. We're here to help. And then I think that pretty much rounds things out. Just wanted to mention that the 2022 Environmental Summit that the Conservation Foundation helps to coordinate is next Monday. It's a virtual summit, a lot of focus on climate change. Doug Talamy is our keynote speaker for that. I'll be sharing some information about the Hamowitz Dam removal project. And there's a number of other speakers on there that can be found at the link there from the Conservation Foundation. It's a free event. You just need to register online. And then I think that pretty much rounds us out for the meeting, unless anybody else has questions or anything else to add, or anything they would like to share for the meeting today. And our next meeting will be on March 17th. We'll be sending information out about that meeting. All right. Doug, did
Jennifer,
you have a comment? Yes, I see.
I
there.
do. I just wanted to thank you and the Conservation Foundation staff over the past 10 years. I don't think we'd be anywhere near where we are without your assistance and guidance, and I appreciate that. And I know we look forward to the years yet to come and all the projects ahead. So thanks everyone for putting today together and the budget and your help over the years. So I just wanted to make sure you got some recognition as well.
Thank you, Doug. I mean, it definitely, it's a two-way street. We at the Conservation Foundation also gain a lot from this partnership as well, really helping us put our mission, really where the rubber meets the road, getting out there and working on rivers and streams and land preservation and the connections that we've been able to make with all of you. So thank you. All right, if there's anybody else wants to add anything or share anything, please do. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up here today. Thank you for all of your time and effort, both over the last 10 years and your time today. And looking forward to 2022. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. See you guys later.